You have fallen into Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. In today's episode, John is joined by John Gertz. John Gertz is the president and CEO of Zorro Productions Incorporated, which he founded in 1977. He has been responsible for 4 Zorro motion pictures. He is an avid amateur astronomer, past president of the Berkeley Jewish Community Center Board, and various other non-profit boards. He earned his MA in psychophysiology from Haifa University and his BA in comparative mythology and religion at UCLA and Prescott College.
John Gertz, welcome back to the program.
Oh, thanks, John, so much for having me.
Now, John, you have a new book out, Reinventing SETI, New Directions in the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is something that is in some ways happening naturally now with the idea of technosignatures and everything else. And that we began with radio SETI because that's what we could look for, simply. That's what we had the equipment to search for. And initially, the original idea by Cocconi and Morrison was looking for beacons, gigantic honking beacons out in the galaxy that would be obvious. And we never found that. And in the many decades of SETI, we still haven't seen anything definitive in the radio realm. What do you think in regards to rethinking SETI as far as radio goes? Do you think that we need to do all sky surveys? What do we need to do to revise SETI to perhaps take a fresh look?
Okay, well, look, we used radio because that's what we had. SETI was invented as a discipline by radio astronomers, Frank Drake as an example. They were trained in radio astronomy. So when you're trained in radio astronomy, what you do, you point your radio telescope at the skies. But just because they had big telescopes didn't mean that it was in tune with ET's best possible strategy. So by one very simple example, X-rays and ultraviolet rays are better transmitters of information and more efficient transmitters of information than radio, but they don't penetrate our atmosphere. So ET might reason, look, we don't want to deal with a civilization that is either so primitive or so stupid as to put their telescopes on the bottom of a deep, thick atmosphere instead of the obvious place in outer space on an asteroid, or in our case on the far side of the moon. So it may be as simple as we're looking in the wrong frequency because we can't look in the right frequency. We don't have the equipment to look in the right frequency. So that's one simple example of what could be wrong with the paradigm.
Now, what are your views, though, on something like laser SETI and looking for laser pulses?
Well, lasers, or if you're talking about optical lasers as opposed to UV lasers and X-ray lasers, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's fine. It just hasn't worked. We've looked at 1 million stars, roughly, something like that, including foreground and background stars, typically for 10 minutes each, and we've come up dry. Now, 1 million stars, it's a big haystack out there, and we're looking for a pretty small needle. 1 million stars sounds like a lot, but it's really a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of all the stars in the galaxy. So that may be a problem. We just haven't looked at enough stars. And even though we've been doing it for 65 years now, truthfully, the SETI that we're doing today is vastly more powerful than the SETI we did only, some years ago. It can be truthfully said that we're doing more SETI in one day today than we did, say, 10 years ago. Okay, but that doesn't still mean that we're doing it in the right way and looking for the right signals. I maintain in my book that ET's best strategy is not transmitting signals from its home planet. That's a dumb idea. Okay, whether or not we've got a radio telescope that could pick it up, that's not what ET's best strategy is. Let's look at the flaws in that paradigm. You've got, well, for one thing, it's dangerous. ET may have reason to know something that we have no idea about, and that is that there may be some very dangerous actors, bad actors in the galaxy, and that by very definition, when you signal from your home planet, you give away your location. Maybe that's a bad idea from the get-go. Another problem with it is that it's desperately difficult to line up temporally. By that I mean to say, our protocol, our typical protocol is we go to star A, look for 10 minutes, go to B, 10 minutes, C, 10 minutes, D, 10 minutes, and on and on and on and on. We could roll through a million stars and then start all over again. It might take us 10 years to go through all the stars. Now, if they're targeting a million stars in the same way, they're transmitting a signal to star A, B, C, D, E, F, and so forth and so on, each for 10 minutes. The chances of the two, their transmitter and our receiver lining up in the same 10-minute time is essentially next to nothing, next to zero. We'll never make contact. Then there's the problem of equity, of just common business sense. In order to send us a signal, they have to expend enormous amounts of energy. You can think of it kind of metaphorically, or by analogy, at a star. We go out in the night sky, we look up, we see a star. That star is putting out phenomenal amounts of energy just to be perceptible to our eyeball. And if we want to put a telescope there instead of our eyeball, it's still, our telescope uses next to no energy, our eyeball uses next to no energy. All the energy expenditure is by the star, or by analogy here, by ET's transmitter. Worse yet for ET, they've got to transmit to planet Earth over what? You tell me, 1 billion years? They don't have any idea when a technological civilization will arise on the planet that may be capable of picking up that signal. So they have to transmit and transmit and transmit over a long period of time. Moreover, they don't have any guarantee that even if we pick up the signal, we're going to return an answer. So justice would indicate that the onus is on us to build gargantuan receivers on a scale to which we are incapable of creating at this point of our technological advancement. And they, who are giving us all the benefit of their wisdom, who are using all the energy, can transmit at a very minor or meager power flux. and consequently, we haven't picked up a signal simply because it's too weak for our current technology. Okay, now, in addition to that, it's a bad idea to send signals because it doesn't return any information. They send signals, and until a civilization arises here on Earth, they get nothing back in return. And even if, as I said, even if we do pick up the signal, it's no guarantee that we are going to return a signal to them or information. It's fraught with problems. Their better strategy, much better strategy, is to send robotic probes to our solar system, which they could have started doing billions of years ago, to surveil us. And once they found out this is a biological planet, maybe sending more probes. And once they see indications of oxygen, they realize that now we're multicellular. And they can deduce from their own algorithms how long it's going to take for that multicellularity to evolve into technology, and send more probes on a faster cadence. And so our solar system is probably filled with probes, either dead ones now that are space junk, or active ones that are now surveilling us and picking up our languages from Sesame Street and our maths from Khan Academy and all the rest from YouTube. And so they're out here. They're here in our own solar system. If indeed they want to make contact, they're here, not there.
Now, you touched on something in both just with what you said, but also very deeply in the book, the idea of making yourself known, METI, where you try to proactively try to contact alien civilizations, even if it's simply like the Arecibo message, where it just blasted off in a certain direction. Anybody that's out there would be able to see that. But the thing is that most of the time we're undetectable at a distance. Maybe our radar or something like that, with somebody with a big enough radio telescope might see that or something like that. But other than the Arecibo signal, we're relatively quiet. Mm-hmm. They would not pick up the 1936 Olympics.
No.
You wouldn't have even seen that outside of Berlin.
That's right.
But they might pick up something. When we were radaring asteroids and all that with Arecibo, which that telescope no longer exists. Mm-hmm. So we're not doing that now. FAST can't do it. So we're quiet. However, on the other side of this, Earth has been screaming the existence of its biosphere for billions of years. Ever since the oxygenation event, it became clear that there are disequilibriums of gas here. So they're going to know, probably anybody in the galaxy that's got a big enough telescope is probably going to know that this planet has a biosphere. They just don't know we just happen to show up here right now. So they may not even know to look or send a signal or do anything because we're just not obvious yet. Now, there are those that say we need to become obvious. And I think this, as we were talking off air, I think this is an enormous mistake. Don't scream in the dark forest, as it were.
Okay, so let me parse this a little bit. I think there's a chapter in my book entitled something along the effect. I don't have the copy of the book in front of me, but the title is something like METI, Beyond Dangerous to the and Stupid, or Beyond the Foolish to Dangerous, Arrogant, Delusional, Unethical, Unscientific, Illegal, Quasi-Religious, Cultic, and Downright Stupid. Okay, that's something like that is the chapter title. So obviously I have no opinion on the matter. No, I'm joking. This is really, really folly. This is really craziness. Let us count the ways. Yes, the Metiists will, and I call them Metiists because as far as I'm concerned, it's a religious cult masquerading as science. But the Metiists will say, "Oh, but what difference does it make if we send signals to the to stars, to other stars? After all, aren't we sending information all the time by way of our omnidirectional leakage? I Love Lucy and so forth." And the answer to that is no. We're actually whispering in a fashion that our signals, our television signals, and so forth, and our terrestrial broadcasts, damp down to imperceptivity and just fade into the cosmic background at relatively short distances. Instead, what they propose to do is use the most powerful transmitters in the world, like, for example, Arecibo before it fell to an ignoble end a few years ago, using huge transmitters, which would have at least 10,000 times the flux or the power of the omnidirectional leakage. So it's a disingenuous argument. But to me, they argue that the cat's out of the bag, and it's not. Yes, of course, the rest of the galaxy knows that we're biological. Any other civilization will know that, not because they can see our atmospheres. Actually, only a small subset of stars are able to see our atmosphere as it passes in front of the sun. Only 1% of nearby stars would have that line of sight. However, I posited in my book that there's a galactic internet. So those probes that I've talked about, transmit back information to other nearby probes, which act as relay stations or communication nodes that disseminate the information all over the universe. So yes, in the subsection of the Encyclopedia Galactica devoted to the Galactic Atlas, we're listed as a biological planet. But that doesn't mean that we're a technological planet. They don't necessarily know that. The real telling issue with METI is that it says it's science, but science has methodology. Where's the methodology here? Okay, let's say, fine, we give them somebody's dumb enough to give them the keys to a Arecibo class transmitter. They transmit a signal to a star 100 light years away and say, "Hi, folks, can you send us a copy of our Encyclopedia Galactica?" Okay, that's fine. Have they reserved that same transmitter for 200 years hence? Okay. Moreover, in other words, the first date on which we could receive a return signal from that purported alien civilization. Moreover, you don't need just one telescope, you need multiple telescopes around the world because the Earth rotates, and a large portion of the time that star is below the horizon of the receiving telescope. Okay, so you need multiple telescopes positioned around the globe, reserved 200 years in advance. But wait a second, are they just satisfied to transmit to one star? Or are they going to transmit to multiple stars? Okay, which means to say you need more telescopes for all these other stars. And do you need to reserve the telescopes 200 years hence for what? An hour? 2 hours? 2 months? 2 years? 200 years? Who knows? Where's their methodology? Okay, so if they had a methodology, I'd say, well, I'd still disagree with the experiment, but at least it might pose as something like science. What they're saying is, and this is what makes it a religious cult, that they believe in three things that to me sound religious. One is that ET is all good, that ET that's not dangerous, but rather wants to give us the benefit of great wisdom and knowledge and technology and so forth. They only care altruistically about our good. Sounds like God to me. Second, they're all powerful, omnipotent, that even though we're whispering into the cosmos with our omnidirectional leakage, that somehow ET is going to hear that signal. And finally, that they're, well, I should say that means that they're omniscient, but finally, that they're omnipotent too, that even though we've made absolutely no provision to receive a return message, that somehow they'll make themselves known to us from the distance of 100 light years. What are they going to do to make themselves known to us and return a message to us when we have no telescopes that are looking at them? So this is not science. It's religion posing as science, and I challenge these people to ask, what gives them the right to do such a thing? Who's who said that they could play with the fate of the entire world on their own lonely say-so? Okay, they retort, well, in a perfect world, of course they would go to the UN Security Council and ask for permission and so forth, but it takes years to do such a thing. Well, listen, when you sign up for the mission of SETI, you should know that you're signing up for a mission that is intergenerational, and I'm terribly sorry to these misguided souls if they're impatient, and can't wait for the results of SETI experiments, of listening just passively, and want to tweak the universe, or poke an eye in the universe, poke a finger in the eye of the universe. It's just not their right to do so.
No, you need a robust infrastructure where the entire world can weigh in onto whether to do it or not. But I would advocate that we never do it anyway, because the moment that you make yourself visible, you give up a certain level of control, your own secrecy. And again, you can't assume that all aliens are altruistic, wonderful beings that are going to be helpful, because humans have never been that way. Two human cultures come into contact, it does not end well, and historically speaking. And I would say assume that first. And once you see that civilization, keep quiet, study it for centuries, and get a profile of it before you even think about sending a message to it.
There's only there's very little that we know about ET, but it's untrue to say we know absolutely nothing about ET. One of the things that we know about the aliens is that, at least when measured technologically, they are aeons in advance of us. Aeons. And the reason you can say that with certainty on a purely statistical basis is that the very first ET alien civilization may have arisen as early as 8 or 9 billion years ago. By that time, the rocky planets had already existed for roughly 4 billion years. It might have taken for a civilization to arise. We can't know exactly, obviously, but somewhere in the 8-9 billion year ago range, it is entirely plausible that the first alien civilizations arose. That's twice the age of our own solar system. That is one hell of a head start. Okay, the chances of us coming in contact with a civilization that is like us in its first 100 or so years of technology and the ability to send and receive radio or laser signals is statistically next to zero. Okay, now we may play better basketball, or we may have better hip hop music or something, but in terms of technology, they're vastly superior to us. They may be playing three-dimensional chess to our proverbial checkers. We may never be able to know their motivations, all the more so because the life forms that we first encounter, or may only encounter, may be silicon-based, not carbon-based. In other words, carbon-based life may have evolved itself into artificial life, robotic life, And we can know nothing of the algorithms that rule or govern those artificial beings, and that's what we're going to come across in our own solar system. The beings that are in our solar system that we encounter will be robotic probes, not little green men, nothing squishy like us.
Well, it's fun to note that we are the only civilization that anyone can prove that actually crashes saucers on other worlds in the form of the Mars rover backshells. And that's what I would look for is trash, I think.
Totally agree.
Flotsam.
Totally agree. One of the things that we should be doing is looking at not so much Mars, where we just don't have, for most of the planet, we don't have the granularity of photographic material to work with, but on the moon we do, where I think most of the moon is now been imaged at half a meter granularity. So we should be applying machine learning to those photographs on the moon, looking for what? Looking for anything anomalous, anything that just doesn't fit, that isn't a rock, that isn't a sand dune or something. There are no sand dunes on Mars, I don't think, but there are crater dunes. We should be looking in our solar system for space junk.
Do you think we would know it if we saw it? Say we're going through Radio SETI and using, again, those algorithms and machine learning to search through there. Is it possible that we would just simply miss this transmission of an alien civilization simply by dismissing it because we didn't know to look for that specific sort of a signal?
Yeah.
And to add a second part to that question, you mentioned temporal. Frank Drake years ago wrote about an article, I think it was in Cosmic Quest magazine in the early 1980s when that existed, that how do you know what the time scales of their transmission would be?
Right.
Maybe it's one blip every 200 years or something like that, and that you're missing it because of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we can only look for what we can sort of guess to look for. That's why I think it's so important to bring artificial intelligence, machine learning into this agnostically, just to look for anything out of the ordinary, because we can only kind of guess right now what we think we might be looking for, and our guesses may be wildly wrong.
Well, I think that might be it. And have you noticed, though, in areas like SETI, sometimes if a signal, or let's take an example, Shabilsky's star, which is a peculiar star that's showing what might be unconfirmed, but what might be transuranic elements in its makeup, which, as Sagan and Shklovsky proposed in the 1960s, was that you should salt your star with plutonium. Well, this one seems to have it. But once that came to light a number of years ago, that there was something weird about this, almost no work has been done on that star whatsoever, except for one that was trying to detect, I believe, promethium in the star and couldn't find it again. They said it was just too noisy. But that's the only thing I've heard of for years. Do you think that do you think SETI can become gun shy if it gets a really good signal?
Oh, I don't know about that, but you raised, I don't know if it's going to get gun shy, but I argue in my book that we're looking at, to the extent that we can detect ET in its own solar system, and to the extent, if I am correct, that they're not sending signals to us, that's a dumb strategy. We can nevertheless detect them in certain type of star systems, and I have suggested in my book, I write a whole chapter on it, that by far and away the best target are white dwarfs. Now, white dwarfs are burnt out stars. Essentially, after a star like our own, a G star, finishes its life on the main sequence, it bloats out to a red giant, and then sloughs off that outer shell, and what's left is a white cinder that just burns for, depending on the size, many, many billions or even up to a trillion or beyond years as it gradually fades to black. Those are the very best targets. Why? Because interstellar, well, if a civilization is facing its own demise, its own doom, as all civilizations on a star like our own will face, what are its alternatives? There's only three. One, to meekly acquiesce to extinction. I think most of us would say that's not a great idea. B is to jump ship, go to another star system. But in my book, Reinventing SETI, I devote a chapter to how virtually impossible that is. Or three, shelter in place. And if sheltering in place is the only viable option, that in itself is not an easy proposition. It will entail, or should entail, some vast astroengineering projects in order to survive. I mean, as the star bloats out into a red giant, the civilization is going to have to move towards the outer edge of the solar system, either by moving its entire planet, which is possible with using tractors, not with chains, but gravity tractors. It can be done over millions of years, or many, many, many millions of years, or by relocating in vast world ships and moving them out to maybe the orbit, in our case, or maybe around the orbit that Pluto describes, or something like that, and awaiting the time when the red giant or the shelf dissipates and the naked white dwarf is there, at which point the home planet might be repopulated. It's a cinder. I mean, its outer crust may be destroyed, but at least it's got the right gravity, and it's got the right day-night cycle, and it's still there. Okay, so it's possible to repopulate it, reconstitute it, but all of this requires a great deal of engineering, and that engineering may be detectable. But by definition, those civilizations who are white, surrounded by in a white dwarf system, are some of the most advanced in our galaxy, because they're ancient, and consequently they may be capable of such astroengineering feats. To my knowledge, only a tiny smattering of SETI observations have been made of white dwarfs. And then, to my knowledge, I may miss something here, but then only looking again under the classic protocol of those civilizations transmitting to us. No, they're not transmitting to us. They've got bigger worries on their mind. Okay, better things to do passively, but they still may be detectable, and that's the key thing.
Now, another one to add to that, in addition to the white dwarfs, are black holes, because one can play thought experiments about a civilization colonizing the environment of a black hole. That is the one SETI signal that I think would particularly scare me, though, because if you can go to a black hole and start collecting energy from that's shooting off its accretion disk with all these X-rays and high energy environment, if you can do that, you don't want them here. No matter what, you don't want them here.
Yeah, those guys are definitely advanced. Well, listen, there are vastly more of white dwarfs that we know about than black holes. Black holes are hard to discover, as you know, and so there's a fairly short list of known black holes in our galaxy, whereas white dwarfs constitute approximately 10% of all stars. There are lots of white dwarfs, and each and every one of them represents a star that is vastly older than our own sun. Whereas, by the way, a black hole represents a star, when it was a star, was much younger than our sun, because a black hole is created by massive stars, A stars and O stars, that end their life after a very short period of time. So no life has really enough time to emerge around a black hole. Whether some starship from another place has arrived at a black hole is another matter altogether.
Now, in regards to white dwarfs, there's another reason why you would want to maintain your civilization there. I mean, number one, as you mentioned, the sun's going to become one, and if we're going to survive, we're going to eventually have to use it as a white dwarf at some point, if we haven't figured out how to stellar lift and refuel it or something like that. Again, mega engineering. But
yeah, that is possible, by the way. Possible. I mean, there are ways, on a piece of paper on the back of an envelope. It would be quite a feat to accomplish, but feeding more hydrogen into the center of a sun so that you maintain the fusion cycle for a longer period of time. So that kind of astroengineering also is something we should look for.
It is. That's a technosignature that I wonder about. And I think the big problem with that sort of thing is getting rid of the helium, the accumulated helium, so that you can get that star back into where it should be. But you can also reduce its class and make it into a red dwarf so it's fully convective and get a lot more efficiency out of it. But I don't know that anybody really knows, until we see a star changing class in exactly the wrong way, which is going to take a very long time to see.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to look for those types of technosignatures. But what I would point out is that if you're going to look for things like Dyson spheres, which are pretty infeasible objects. But let's say, for the sake of conversation, that you could build a Dyson sphere, do it around a white dwarf, because that's going to be stable, and it's not going to be this huge high energy. But if you've got a whole sphere around it, you're getting plenty, and that would be the start to do it, because you don't need a big one with a white dwarf.
Well, that's precisely the type of astroengineering I'm referring to, because there's several problems here with the white dwarf. Number one is they give out intense ultraviolet rays, or at least in the beginning, and making life around them impossible. Now, so it would require shielding, UV shielding, and those vast shields may be detectable. Okay, so that's one possibility of detectability. The other is that once you that all of those X-rays and ultraviolet rays could be converted to usable energy, and those power stations that are converting those frequencies into usable power and then beaming it back to the cinder Earth, the remnant Earth, or the remnant planet around a white dwarf, is something that may be detectable. And then, of course, you could have living quarters that are big world ships and they also may be detectable. So, all in all, white dwarfs, I think, should be the prime candidate for SETI research, and virtually nobody's done it, to my knowledge, in a systematic way, in a systematic, comprehensive way.
It's interesting because we actually are seeing something very interesting above and beyond the certain alien component that's been advanced for it. But the interstellar object 3I Atlas is significantly older than the solar system, showing us a sample of matter from 7 billion years ago, say, giving a window into the earlier universe, which I think it's crucial to study the ratios of volatiles and everything that's going to be in that thing, that's going to come out of it, because that will tell you potentially, especially if there's organic chemistry with it, which I'm sure there is, probably tholins and all kinds of stuff, but that would tell you, it might allow you to constrain just how early life could have developed. And if it shows that it could have been here 7 billion years ago, then again, you're getting closer to your 9 billion years or 10 billion years mark, meaning that, God, there's got to be somebody out there at that point. That has to be.
Yeah. Well, certainly, as 3I Atlas gets closer and we have better data on it, it should be a very, very fascinating object to observe. I'm certainly looking forward to that. One thing it is not is an alien spacecraft. So let's rest that notion.
Well,
it fits the models for everything that we believe.
At this point, it's got a coma, and that was enough for me.
Yeah, exactly. It is not an alien spacecraft, and I've done a number of interviews around the book, and the question has come up quite a few times, actually. Is it an alien spacecraft? No, it is not. It's a very fascinating object, but not an alien spacecraft.
Well, even if it were, it would be a very inefficient one, because it's throwing off water and dust, and it just I can think of a lot better of a way to build your spacecraft than one that's tearing itself apart effectively.
Well, also one of the telltales, and this applies very much to Oumuamua, that Avi Loeb made such a big deal about, which was also a space rock. One of the telltale signs is, where's it coming from? Where's it going? If it were coming from Barnard's star, which is the second closest star to ours, it's 6 light years, and headed past us to Alpha Centauri, I would pop the champagne bottles and say, we've made a detection. Okay. But no, such an arbitrary, such a, contrived trajectory would really, really be convincing evidence that this is artificial. In fact, it was coming from nowhere in particular and going nowhere in particular. It's been 1 million+ years since it went through any other solar system. It'll be millions more before it goes through any other solar system. So so to me, that was kind of telling give. The one thing about Oumuamua is that, there was so little data on it. By the time we caught it, it was already leaving the solar system. And, and anybody can see whatever they want out of a few pixels. In my experience, the blurrier the picture, the more happy people are to declare it to be of alien derivation.
Well, I think the thing that most intrigued me about Oumuamua, and this shows my science geek side, is age again, because its motion seemed to suggest that it was a relatively young object, as opposed to the absolutely screaming 68 kilometers per second of 3i Atlas, which shows that it's an ancient object. Collective gravity of the galaxy gets these things going, but Oumuamua was not moving at all. People make say, well, it accelerated or decelerated or accelerated or whatever it did, but it was actually not moving that much. It was more that the solar system rammed into it. And
yeah, it was yeah, I forget the exact speed of. I think by the time it passed the sun, it was like 23 kilometers a second or something like that. But it was not screamingly.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I have this unhealthy fascination with the age of objects in the Milky Way, just
Mhm.
because my inner geologist tells me what might be there and what might be different. Now, the search for technosignatures that's now developing, and things like using the JWST to look for biosignatures and start to search for other Earths. Are you relatively confident in that right now, or do you think we still have a ways to go in development before we could reliably do those kinds of searches?
Oh, we're just obviously at the beginning of it. So, as new telescopes come online, bigger telescopes, more suited to the purpose at hand of looking at atmospheres, exoatmospheres as they pass in front of their suns. This should be very promising. That having been said, it's not my area of expertise whatsoever. But I have to say that those who do study it find it very perplexing and very difficult to be able to tease out something that is declaratively a biosignature from these atmospheres. It's going to be a long time before we have the technology, for example, to see artificial chemicals in a atmosphere. Now, our atmosphere has trace artificial chemicals, as you know, and those would be clearly biosignatures and intelligent technosignatures. But that's a generation of telescopes that's way in advance of what we have. Complex molecules, the more complex the molecule, the more difficult it is to tease out the signal from the noise and be able to definitively say it is a specific molecule and no other molecule, and that molecule is only biogenic as we understand how that molecule can be created. So it's a difficult road to hoe, and but there are people doing it and will be doing it, and I wish them well in that endeavor. But no, unless we can determine that there's technological chemicals, and that's way beyond our capabilities of right now or in the foreseeable future. The most that we'd be able to determine is that a planet is biogenic. We can't tell anything of it, whether it's technological by that method.
You know, though, one of the interesting things hidden in that subject of artificial chemicals is, things like Freon, CFCs, and those things that you can look for.
Mhm.
Those also happen to be extremely potent greenhouse gases
Yep.
that would be very useful if one wanted to terraform a planet
Right.
and fill the atmosphere with it. So it might actually be a very visible signature if you happen to run across long-term terraformers. Do you think that when we find something, it could be something weird like that we just didn't expect? Do you think it's just going to blow our mind that we're like, what are they doing, type of thing? Or do you think it'll be our expectation of take me to your leader or something like that is probably more viable? Which do you think it'll be?
A prominent SETI researcher came into my office one day some years ago, not that many years ago, and swore me to secrecy that a paper was just about to be published indicating that a star in the Kepler field was being dimmed by a remarkable 22%. And I asked a couple of questions. Of course, that's astounding when you realize that Jupiter would be less than 1% if somebody were looking at our solar system, the dimming of a Jupiter. So it was something massive that was doing the dimming. And I asked the researcher, well, just one question, really, what's the periodicity of the dimming? In other words, what's the orbit? And his response was, there is no periodicity. To me, that settled the matter. It was a natural phenomenon. I can't imagine I could not imagine an artificial object around a star that is not, in fact, going around the star, but staying stationary, if you will. And indeed, that's Tabby's star, as it's come to be called. And that periodicity is most people believe is a dust cloud, or caused by a dust cloud, or that is in the foreground between us and Tabby star, and it may be not at all associated with Tabby star, just coincidentally in the foreground. It's a natural phenomenon, but something like that may knock our socks off, and the next time around, it may actually be indicative of aliens.
It might be, but the confounding thing with KSC 8462852, that star's phone number is burned into my brain, Tabby star.
Oh, good. I don't remember it, but yes.
The thing is that it was a lack of knowledge initially. In other words, they didn't have what you crucially need to determine dust, which is you see the absorption of different wavelengths of light in your filters in your telescope. It didn't have that. All they had was a lack of infrared, which is still puzzling, but that just means the dust is cold. And it's in between you, if it's in between you and the star, then of course it's going to be cold, so that would explain that. But the thing is there just wasn't enough known. They only had a partial picture. Only later did it start to say, okay, this looks like this is a phenomenon of dust, which is where it's sitting now. But there's still, to this day, there is no periodicity detected. No compelling periodicity, nothing.
Exactly. But that is an example where we should keep our minds open. And we have to, the people that discovered pulsars originally called them LGM, little green men, and they really seriously thought maybe this is ET, but they kept that to themselves as they sought confirmation and found another pulsar and eliminated that hypothesis that it could be artificial, and suitably received the Nobel for the discovery. However, that's the way we should be treating astronomical anomalies that crop up from time to time. Fast radio bursts are du jour right now, but we should keep an open mind. We should assume that it's a physical phenomenon, maybe, but also simultaneously accept the possibility and test for the possibility that it may be of alien derivation. And something completely strange like that may pop out at us. It may turn out that we've discovered new physics or new astronomical phenomena, and that's fantastic in and of itself. Or maybe we'll all pop the champagne one day and it turns out that it is ET.
Event Horizon and my channel are now available as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube memberships. Early ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, and sleep-focused content. Sign up now by clicking the links below to your platform of choice.